Here are a couple PSAT boot camps I presented at my high school. Before we start, please consider donating to my children's home, Best Point. They are deeply dedicated to helping the lives of many children and families and have played a crucial role in my life. If you donate, please designate your gift towards Turpin PSAT. Thank you very much and hope that you enjoyed this video. So, hello, my name is Charlie Coe. I'm a rising senior at Turpin. A little bit about me. I'm in Superior Customer Values at PNG. I'm an intern there. I have a cute cat. His name is Typer, and I play first varsity singles for Turpin's tennis team. I'm the elected team captain, and I'm also the president of the debate club. Outside of school, some things I do is I have a business, I tutor, and I have a collection of over 24 math, science, coding, 3D modeling YouTube videos. I'm very proud of them. You guys should totally take a look at them. But anyways, so the agenda for today will be a little bit shorter than the reading and writing sections that we talked about earlier. That is mainly because the math section is a lot more specific, which sucks, but also means that it's a lot more specific for everyone else. So the score improvement in math is really important. We're going to go over the format, why the PSAT is important, along with the common questions, tips, general tips, and go over some practice questions, and finally close off with an idea of, I guess, if I had to retake these tests, how I would study for them. So first off, the format, the PSAT is out of 1520 points. The SAT is out of 1600, so it's a little bit shorter in that aspect. It's also a little bit easier too. So it's split evenly in the middle for 760 points in reading and writing and 760 points for math. You guys will be taking the digital test on October 22, so you guys have a lot of time to study. The math section specifically will be 1 hour and 10 minutes long with 35 minutes each section. There will be a total of 44 questions. Now, unlike the reading and writing section, which is all multiple choice, there will be some fill-in questions, which is unfortunate. But overall, the math section is in 2 sections, 22 questions each. You guys do not get a break in between those 2 sections. However, going from like the reading and writing to the math section, you guys do get like a nice break. There's going to be a calculator the entire time, which is really nice. It's going to be the Desmos calculator specifically. We're going to talk a lot about that soon because it's one of the best tools. And also, I mentioned how like section 2 for the reading and writing is hard. It gets harder. However, section 2 for the math section, at least in every single experience I've had, gets a lot harder. So the switch from section 1 to section 2 really sucks for the math especially. The test is adaptive, which means the better you do on section 1, the harder section 2 is. And it's still a standardized test, which is a little bit weird, but I guess that's a new thing that's going on. So overall, the reason why the PSAT is important to take and why you guys should totally take it is that there's a lot of scholarships behind it. It helps pay for college. The one that instantly comes to mind is the National Merit Scholarship, but adding on to that, there's also a lot of school-based scholarships, job-based scholarships, and etc. So a lot of opportunities for free money, so why not? Your National Merit Scholarship is based on a score calculation, which is 2 times your reading and writing plus your math score divided by 10. Ohio typically has a cutoff for 209 for commended and 216 for semifinalists. So commended, semifinalists, and finalists are different, I guess, tiers or rankings. They're always nice to get the higher one because the most scholarships are at the higher ranks, and also it looks better on like your job application, your LinkedIn, your Common App, and so on. So the finalist is where things get a little bit weird. The difference between a semifinalist and finalist, although like the name kind of implies that you guys have to get like a higher score to become a finalist, it doesn't. The difference between a semifinalist and finalist is that there's an essay requirement, and also the principal has to recommend you for it. I'm sure that Mr. Janos would recommend everyone because it makes Turpin or Anderson look good in that aspect. And then the top 50% or so of the finalists get the National Merit Scholarship, which is $2,500. But then again, there's a lot of other scholarships, so I linked all the other ones on the slideshow, which I'll send out to the parents. And then finally, it's great practice for the ACT and SAT. They're all standardized tests. They all have really similar questions, as you guys will see. And yeah, so that's going to be the format and why it's important to take the PSAT. So let's go over some common questions that you guys will run into. So I think that one thing that's really important to note is that the PSAT questions, especially for like the math, are strange in like the way where like they're either really easy or like really hard. There's like no middle ground. Like sometimes you might just get like a simple like what's 12 times 6 question. I'm not saying you'll get that. It's going to be a little bit harder than that, but it's going to be a lot easier than you're going to expect on a lot of questions. And I'm sure that every one of you guys will ace that section. However, there's also a lot of questions that are thrown at you which are very strange. They're a lot harder. and they're also a lot more, I guess, specific and detailed. Luckily, most of the questions do not go beyond Algebra 2. So I know it's a test that you guys take in 11th grade. So getting that pre-calc knowledge is really useful, which really sucks because there's some of the questions on the PSAT math that requires a little bit of pre-calc, which we'll talk about here. However, it's not much. So if you guys are taking pre-calc in your 11th grade year, where the National Merit Scholarship is, I guess, emphasized on, then it's also going to be okay, but make sure to look at that a little bit closer. So some of the questions that we're going to be talking about are going to be really basic. Like, for example, we got dimensional analysis. You guys learned about this in chemistry, hopefully, aka unit conversions. Now, like how I mentioned, a lot of these questions are very easy, and then there's like a lot of hard questions. So these are kind of an example of a question that you would see on like the easier side of the spectrum, right? So it's not going to be as easy as like convert feet to yards, right? It's going to be more like convert, I don't know, feet to yards squared or something like that. I think something that's really cool about the PSAT is that they always give you like the conversion. So like if you want to know how many like feet is in like a yard, it tells you. How many miles are in a yard, it tells you there too, which is always great. But the key thing here is just to realize the units, pay close attention with those. Again, this might seem really easy, but I'm still going to work it out really quickly just in case. So we're given that there's 11,863,808 square yards. So, oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. Okay. This whiteboard is not stable. All right. I might be writing a little bit too big, but hopefully not. 863,808 square yards. Right, yard squared. Right, so we're given that the conversion from yard to mile is just 1,760 yards per mile. However, in this case, we're dealing with yards squared. So we have our conversion factor. We have yards in the numerator, so we have to put yards in the denominator here. And we have yards to miles is going to be 1,000. Oh my God, my handwriting's so bad. Hopefully you guys could kind of see that. But notice how we have yards squared here, but we only have miles per yard here. So we need to square this entire, everything in the parentheses, which will give us miles squared and yards squared, along with squaring this 1,760 there. I just realized how bad my handwriting is, but hopefully you guys kind of get the gist there. And then from here, we got yards squared in the numerator, yards squared in the denominator. We can cancel those, and that'll give us the units in miles squared. Now, this is where Desmos comes in. It is really nice in the fact where I don't know what 11,863,808 divided by 1,760 squared is, and you guys aren't expected either. However, thankfully, that Desmos calculator, you can simply enter it in. I could actually quickly pull it up too to kind of give you guys a look of what you guys will be seeing on test day. So there's going to be a pop-out which brings you to this exact page, which is very nice or really not nice, depending on if you guys use Desmos a lot. So you're just going to see like a blank canvas here along with like a place to enter in equations or expressions. And then from here, you just type in what you want into this, treat it like a, I guess, a numeric calculator. So like 11,863,808 yards. And then we're going to divide this by 1,760 squared, like so. And that'll give us an answer of 3.83. So that's how the Desmos calculator works. It's a little bit strange, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But on a very high level, that is kind of how it's like. So you're going to be running into some dimensional analysis questions, so be prepared for that. They're not going to be really hard, but they're not going to be extremely easy as just like a simple conversion, feet to yard, or so on. So that is the first question type that you're going to run into, which hopefully you guys have seen before. That's a definitely big AP chemistry topic. Next up, this one, trigonometry. This one might be one which you guys might not be as familiar with. It's a pre-calc concept. Granted, it's a little bit early in pre-calc, which is good. So most of the topics on the PSAT math section are going to all be Algebra 2, Algebra 1, geometry topics. However, they do throw at you some really basic trigonometry, which hopefully you guys will learn in, I guess, bigger detail before you guys actually take the test. However, at a really high level, type of question that you'll see is like, in the triangle shown, what is the value of tan x, right? So knowing like at like a very basic level what like a sine is, what a cosine is, what a tangent is. And I guess the way that a lot of people will memorize this is something called like SOHCAHTOA, where SOH, S-O-H, up here is like sine is the S, and then opposite over hypotenuse. So, and then we have like sine of theta. This thing this here is theta. You're going to see that a lot. Is going to be the opposite of O divided by the hypotenuse, H. And then cosine, which is the C, which will be equal to adjacent, which is the A, divided by hypotenuse. And then tangent is going to be the opposite divided by the adjacent. So that is really all you need to know for the PSAT. So pretty basic trig. However, it's really weird if you guys have not seen it in the past. So a type of question which I got directly from the PSAT is like, in the triangle shown, what is the value of tangent x? Wow, we have a really good band. Okay. Okay. What is the value of tangent x? So tangent is TOA, so opposite over adjacent. So our opposite here, we remember that our theta angle here is going to be this x angle here. It's not always going to be like the bottom right angle, like in this example. So opposite of this angle here is going to be 26, right? And then our adjacent will be the 7 here, right? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If that doesn't, you guys will learn it, and you guys will be great at it. So that gives us the answer of C, 26 over 7. So basic trigonometry questions will pop up. So it's good to know a little bit about that. Next up, we got length and area of an arc. This might be something that everyone here is very familiar with, or it might not be. It's a little bit of like a, oh, my teacher taught me this, your teacher did not type moment here. But when I was in Algebra 2, my teacher talked a little bit about this. So basically, the way to think about this is that the entire circle, the circumference of a circle, 2 pi r, is kind of like, if you unravel that circle, it's like the length of that circle. So it's like all the way from here to here. It's going to be that length there. So that will be 2 pi r. That's just something that we're just all forced to memorize, 2 pi r and pi r squared. So if you want to find like a specific length of that circle, like for example, like 75 degrees, like this sector here, you want to find what this arc length is here, it'll usually ask you like, what's the arc length of the provided sector of this circle? And it'll be like this 75-degree sector here. What you want to do is going to be the entire circumference of the circle, 2 pi r. The r in this case will be 15, so that'll be 30 pi, times the degrees, in this case 75 degrees, divided by 360. So I guess that you guys don't really need to know this. However, it's good to know to, I guess, to understand a little bit further. The reason why it's 75 divided by 360, the reasoning behind this is because you can think of it as like the entire circle is 2 pi r, right? And that in lengthwise is 2 pi r. And you only want a specific fraction of that length, right? And that specific fraction of the length, if the entire circle is 360 degrees, you only want that 75-degree section of that 360 degrees, which is why it's 75 divided by 360. It's the fraction of the circle that you want to get that length for. So very similar idea for the area, except the area of a circle, pi r squared. So the entire area of the circle, which is like this entire shaded region, it's going to ask you, what is the area of the provided sector? And the provided sector is like a 75-degree area here. So what you want to do, get the entire area of the circle, which would be 225 pi, and then multiply that by the, I guess, fraction of the circle, right? In this case, it'll be 75 divided by 360. So you will see a couple of these pop up. It's not as common as some of the other ones we're going to be talking about, but definitely know how to calculate length and area of a specific sector of a circle. All right, next up, radians. Another topic which you guys might not be as familiar with, which is okay because it's not terrible. You guys hopefully will learn this before you guys take the PSAT in greater detail than I'll explain it. So however, you could think of radians as like a different way to, I guess, show an angle instead of degrees. So for example, if you want to say, oh, it's 30 degrees, you could just say, oh, it's pi divided by 6 radians, right? So the best way to think about this is kind of, especially at like a very high level, is to think of it as like radians to degrees is like a conversion, kind of like Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? There are two ways to say the same thing, right? So an entire circle is 2 pi radians. So instead of it being 360 degrees from here to here, it's going to be 2 pi radians to go from here to here, right? So half of that, 180 degrees, would be half of that circle. So that'll be 180 degrees will be pi radians. So you can see pi radians here, 2 pi radians for a full circle. Now the questions that you're going to be getting about radians, thankfully, aren't really based in pre-calc. Like what is the sign of pi divided by 6, right? It's going to be more like convert radians to angles, which is always good. So in this case, we have a question here which is like an angle is a measure of 16 pi over 15 radians. And we want to know the measure of that in degrees. So what we know is that if you only want to remember that a whole circle is 2 pi radians and half of a circle is pi radians, you would be okay, especially for the PSAT. But in this case, since we're told that an angle is a measure of 16 pi over 15 radians, well, we know that 16 pi divided by 15, this is also equal to pi plus 1 over 15 pi, right? So if we think about it like that, we know that pi radians is going to be 180 degrees because that's going to be half of a circle, 180 degrees. So 180 degrees, they're very loud. And we also know that pi radians is going to be 180 degrees again. So to convert radians to degrees, we have 1 over 15 pi radians, and we want to convert that to degrees. So we know that pi is going to be 180 degrees. So that would be 180 divided by 15. No, I think that's something really important to emphasize here is that it's okay if this makes very little sense to you guys right now because it's going to be a topic that you guys will be learning in much more detail before you guys actually take the PSAT, which is great because it is a pre-calc concept, very early pre-calc. So get excited for pre-calc if you guys are going to be taking it because you're going to be seeing a lot of that coming up. All right, next up, compound interest. These are questions which you wouldn't expect to see a lot on the PSAT, but usually see one at least, or maybe even two in a lot of cases, right? Now, these questions on like the surface look really scary because it's a lot of numbers and it's a word problem. They don't look fun to do. However, if you think about it in a more like eliminate answer choices because they're impossible type of way of thinking about it, it gets a lot, I guess, more basic, right? So in this case, we have a model which predicts the population of Springfield. So that's basically just a lot of fancy stuff. We're just saying, oh, we're just predicting the population of a place. Was 15,000 in 2005. And the model will predict that each year for the next 5 years, the population P increases by 4% of the previous year's population. So in simple person terms, that basically just means each year, the population will just be 0.04 greater than the previous year, right? So 4% greater than the previous year for the next 5 years. So now it's asked, what equation best represents this model, where x is like the number of years after 2005 for x is less than or equal to 5. So it's scary. I don't like these when I first learned them. But I think that the best way of looking at this, if you don't want to memorize this expression here, which eventually you guys will probably have to memorize, will just be to cross off the answer choices which make absolutely zero sense. So starting off, we know that x is going to be the number of years after 2005. And we also know that each year the population is increasing by 4%. So each year the population is increasing by 4%. So what we could do is we could plug in a value for x, like let's say 1 year from now, right? So in 1 year from now, what is the predicted population of this place called Springfield? Now we're told that's 15,000 back in 2005. And we also know that each year it should be increasing by 4%. So let's say that we plug in, I don't know, let's say it's going to be the second year. So second year, 2007. So x is equal to 2 because it's 2 years after 2005. So A, if we plug in 2 for x, which is up here, that will be a big number, okay? I'm sure that that's not going to be like a little bit percent increase, but that'll be like, that would be a lot more. That would be 225,000 times 0.96. So I don't think the population of Springfield will go from 15,000 to that after 2 years, especially with a 4% increase. B, same thing here. 2 years, 2007, 15,000, 225,000 times 1.04. Again, a very big number. It's not plausible for that population to increase that much in 2 years, especially when we're saying that it's increased by 4% each year. And then C looks a little bit more promising in the fact where if you plug in 2007 for like the year, aka x is equal to 2, it does not give you a really big number. However, it gives you a number that's less than 15,000. And we're told that the population is increasing by 4% each year. So C also can't be right, and that leaves us with D. Now, the way that I just did that is it's a little bit slow, but it's not terrible. Just plugging in a value for x and just eyeballing it. However, the way that, I guess maybe you guys might have been taught this in Algebra 2, the way that is normally done for compound interest is this equation up here, where your principal, which is going to be 15,000, which is going to be our initial population, will be multiplied by 1 plus our increase per year. So that increase per year right now is 0.04, so that'll be 1.04, right, for our interest rate. So that'll just be 15,000 times 1.04, which is over here, and that'll be raised to the time, every single time it's increasing, right? And we're told that's increasing per year, a 0.04 increase on the previous years each year. So that is why it's just going to be x up there. So that's another way of looking at it. It depends which way you prefer. The first way is slower. The second way would be a little bit faster, but it also requires a little bit more memorization, which I don't like. I don't like memorizing things. But yeah, so that is compound interest at a very basic level. Next up, we got word problems. The word problems, thankfully, don't tend to be killer. They tend to be difficult, but they tend to be usually not very high stress problems. So I think the big thing, especially coming out of what we talked about on Friday, where we really emphasized, saving time, being efficient, don't read the useless garbage, but don't skim these word problems, especially the math word problems, especially since they usually have like details scattered throughout it, which can be useful. So for example, on this word problem, I would of course read the entire question instead of just only reading the section that has like a blank to it, like how we did for like the reading and writing. So in this one, we're told that there's a proposal for a new library on an election ballot. And we're given that the radio show states that 3 times as many people voted in favor for the proposal as people who voted against it. So what does that mean? Well, on like a surface level, it might mean a lot of weird things. However, when you write it out, it makes a little bit more sense. So we're told that the radio show says that 3 times as many people voted in favor of the proposal as people who voted against it. So let's say we just throw in like a variable for like the people who voted against the show. Let's say that's like, I don't know, X. So X are the people who vote against. So like vote against, right? I'm gonna run out of space. All right. And we're told that 3 times as many people voted in favor as people who voted against it, right? So people who voted in favor will be 3 times X, because X is the people that voted against it, right? Now, we're also told that the social media posts reported that 15,000 more people voted in favor for the proposal than against it. So that means that 3X will be equal to X, the people who voted against it, plus 15,000, because there's 15,000 more people who voted in favor than against it. So X plus 15,000. Oh, okay, that looks like a 3. 15,000. All right. So I guess when you look at it from this way, the problem looks a lot easier. So I think something that's also important is to, even though you don't feel like showing your work actually can make the problems a lot easier than how they are at face value. So from here, you solve for X, subtract X from both sides. That would be 2X is equal to 15,000, which will give you that X is equal to 7,500, which is an answer choice. Now, the way I did it is very slow. On the PSAT, you should move at a faster pace than what I did, but I just wanted to make sure that was pretty clear instead of just me just throwing like a random variable and for people vote against. All right, so those are word problems. All right, next up, I think that we have the part 2 questions. So I would not say that these like are a common question type because they're just the type of question that just pop up. These are the questions that you will see, especially on the part 2 of the math section. So these get really nasty. I don't like them. They're really difficult compared to the part 1 questions, which are more like simple algebra. But the part 2 questions, the key with these is really to work fast through the other questions, which actually is not that bad because the PSAT does give you a lot more time on the math section than you would probably need. So to use that saved time from the previous questions and spend it on these more difficult questions. Another thing is to definitely, if you've not completed all the other questions besides like these really hard part 2 questions, I would definitely skip these and then come back to them. So one thing that really, I guess, hurt my score the first time I took like an SAT or ACT standardized test was that I did not want to just move on from like these really difficult questions.
well, okay, I would not say really difficult, but more questions that actually require me to think, right? I would just sit here and just like, how would I do this question? Instead of, oh yeah, what's up, Nora?
Can you skip even though the questions are getting harder?
Yeah.
If you can go back?
So that's actually one of the reasons why like people really hate the adaptive test, because it gets harder. However, the cool thing about the adaptive test in that aspect is that it's 2 sections, right? So the second section's difficulty is based on like your first section's difficulty. So like after you complete like the first section, all the questions in your second section are already set.
Oh, okay.
It's so weird like that, I know. It's like, I don't know why they would make these tests adaptive, but standardized tests just do it, all right? So is that good? All right. So the skip and come back to it's always nice. There is a flag tool on the PSAT if you want to use that, but it also screams at you if you leave any answers blank. So those are 2 ways of remembering to go back to it. All right, so this is an example of a part 2 question. I'll work it out on the board right now, actually. But again, if you're confused about these questions, don't worry. You still have 3 months, 2 months to study. And again, one thing that I think is really cool about these standardized tests is that you can miss a couple questions and you'll be all right? But definitely focus on getting all the easy questions right. Okay, so this question, we got a triangle ABC. We know that the measure of angle B is 90 degrees. I think one of my problems is I hate to show my work. I like really hate to show my work. My teachers always yell at me, show your work, show your work. And I'm like, no. But I think showing your work for this question definitely helps, so draw it out. So we got a triangle of ABC, right? A, B, and then C. We're told that the angle B is 90 degrees, so we could just put a 90-degree marker there, like so. All right, now we're also told that BD is an altitude of a triangle. An altitude of a triangle is going from this specific corridor B to the hypotenuse. So basically, it's going to be a perpendicular line to the hypotenuse down to an angle. So in this case, it will be, I'm just going to estimate it. I'm no talented artist. I'm really bad at art, but like that. And that will form a 90-degree angle to the hypotenuse. So that's what the altitude is. We're told that that's going to be line BD. So we have B here, so let's put D here. All right, that is not great. Okay, anyways, we're told that the length of AB is 15, so we can put that down here, 15. And we're also told that the length of AC is 23 greater than the length of AB. So we're basically just told that AC is 38, right? So AC from here to here, it's 38, all right? And now we want to know the value of BC divided by BD, right? So we want to know the value of this here, this line, divided by this line, all right? So how are we going to do that? Yeah, it's not an easy question. I think that, what? It is. Yeah, exactly. So this question is actually on one of my worst subjects, which is geometry. I really hate geometry. I hate the proofs. I hate the postulates. But there's also a lot of applications of geometry, and specifically the similar triangles. So in this case, we want to find a similar triangle to be able to show that ratio of BC to BD, right? So what do we know? Well, we know that this angle here is 90 degrees. We know that this angle here is 90 degrees. And we also know that this angle here, A, is shared between like this big triangle, ABC, and ADB, all right? So all the angles inside of a triangle have to add up to 180 degrees, right? So that means that if 2 angles are shared, that means that the third angle needs to also be the same between the 2 triangles, okay? So for both the ADB triangle and the ABC triangle, we both have 90 degrees. And we also have this angle here, A, so like A, right? And then we also have this last angle here, which we don't know. We could just call this C for now. And all this has to add up to 180 degrees. So we know that A is going to be the same for the triangle ADB and also ABC, right? So that means that C is going to also be the same. So this angle here is going to also be equal to this angle here. I think they call this postulate like angle similarity postulate. It's something fancy. I don't know. So what we could do is we could actually draw out this ABD triangle here to make it a little bit more clear what's going on. Because I look at this and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I'm sure that you guys probably look at this and think this exact same thing. So if we draw out this ADB triangle on the right here, so we have A, then our D will be our right angle, which is going to be this angle B. So we can put D here. You have D. And then lastly, we have our angle here, which we don't know, right? So I'm just going to call this something random. Let's just call this X, right? All right, so we have our right angle here. We're sharing angle A, and we also know that this angle here is equal to this angle here for C, okay? So that means that, that this triangle here is similar to this entire ABC triangle here, okay? What else do we know? We also know the value of this here, which is going to be AB, this line here. Why is that? Well, because since this triangle is similar to this triangle, what we basically did was that we just rotated this triangle. All right, this is why I hate geometry. There's a little bit of too much imagination going on. But what we did is we rotated this triangle. First off, we brought this right angle down. Then we reflected this over the y-axis to create this, right? So this hypotenuse here of 15 is actually going to be here, all right? So if you look at this, another way of looking at this is that this triangle here is this ADV triangle here, okay? Make a little bit of sense, hopefully? If it doesn't, we'll talk about this a little bit more. But anyways, so now we know that these two triangles are similar. So that means that each side of the ABC triangle will be 38 divided by 15 times as long, right? So we have 38 divided by 15, right? So for example, this line BC will be 38 times 15 divided by 15 times longer than DX, right? Because they're similar triangles in that aspect. And that leads us to our answer. So what is the value of BC divided by BD? Well, we have BC here, and then we have BD here. So that would give us 38 divided by 15, so D. All right, what I really want to emphasize here is that this is the hardest question I think I was able to find on the PSAT. And I know for a fact that you can miss one question and still get a perfect score in math. So D is the correct answer here. And honestly, this question here is just one really nasty one that they just throw at you. So I think that the key here is to definitely, if you're stuck, skip and come back. I can see that Nora and Jet are working hard trying to figure it out because it is a hard question. But yep, use your save time. If you have no idea what's going on, skip it and come back. Because trust me, if you have a hard time, I'm sure that everyone else is also having a hard time. All right. Good-ish? Any questions about that? I know this question sucks. I'm sorry. All right. Moving on. General tips. So my apologies. I talked about these a lot for the reading and writing section on Friday. But we have a lot of new people here, so I'm going to be a little bit repetitive. So it's okay. But anyways, again, don't leave answers blank. You don't lose any points if you guess on the PSAT. What we did earlier, we eliminated wrong answers, which really helped us narrow it down to take a better guess. We also narrowed it down so that we could actually check the answers that it probably is. Also, skip the hard questions to return to, like this one. This question here is hard, okay? It's not hard in like the aspect like, oh, it's all calculus BC material. No, it's hard in the aspect where it kind of requires you to use a little bit too much imagination, and I don't like that. And also think about the test in sections. I already used this analogy, I'm just gonna repeat it. So you can think of it like you have a Bell 6 exam, like you have calculus AB, you have the hardest test of your life, and right after that, you're moving straight into AP stats. You have another test there, right? You don't wanna just like, oh, I just took such a hard test on calc. I'm just gonna give up for this test on stats. I would hope that you guys re-lock in. So try to think of it like for math, because section 1 might be, oh, I just finished like an easy English exam. I'm just gonna take it a little bit relaxed, and then you go straight into like the hardest class of your life, take a test there. So definitely stay focused from section to section. And also, when you wake up before the test, it will be on like the morning, and I think that October 22 is the weekend. So wake up a little bit earlier, maybe like 30 minutes earlier. Read a book for a little bit, read some news articles, read something boring, because a lot of the stuff on the PSAT is boring stuff. And also, don't pull an all-nighter. Don't pull an all-nighter like the day before. Don't pull an all-nighter the day before. And finally, stay on top of time, especially from the switch to part 1 to part 2. And now we have Desmos. So we're going to go actually a lot more in depth with Desmos. All right, so Desmos is the calculator. I think I showed it very briefly earlier. that everyone will be having access to for the entire math section of the PSAT, right? So it looks something like this, and on like the surface, it's very different from every calculator that you guys might have used in like the past, which is why it's important to get used to it. There's a lot of features inside of Desmos that there's not in like other calculators. Like for example, if you want to see what is shaded, like what is equivalent to like a shaded area, so like y is greater than or equal to like 3x, it actually shades it in for you, which is nice. You play with the colors if you want, but I would hope that you guys don't play with the colors. It's a standardized test. But it also helps you solve a lot of these questions, right? So for example, we have this question here, which is like the function g is defined by g of x is equal to f of x plus 5. For what value of x does g of x reach its minimum? So there's multiple ways of doing this question, and I think the Desmos way is by far the easiest. So like one thing that might pop in your mind if you don't have access to Desmos or a calculator would be just to throw an x plus 5 wherever there's an x in this function here. So yeah, you could give that a shot. It's not fun, right? So what we have here, we just have this f of x, 4x squared plus 64x plus 262. So wherever there's an x, we're going to be putting in an x plus 5 because we want to know when g of x reaches its minimum, and g of x is equal to f of x, except whenever there's an x, g of x is x plus 5 instead, right? So let's type that out into Desmos, like so. So that's 4x squared. So wherever there's an x, we're going to put an x plus 5, like so. Go back. 64x. Another cool thing about the calculator on test day is that it'll be overlaid with the question, so you don't have to keep on switching tabs, which is always great, especially if you're like me and have like a terrible memory. And then plus 262. So we want to find where the minimum is of this function here, right? And another cool thing about Desmos is it just gives you like the exact point. If you hover your mouse cursor at the very bottom, it just tells you -13 and 6. So cool feature of Desmos, and that gives us our answer of that the minimum of this function is when x is equal to -13. So that gives us the answer of this question a lot faster than it would be if you just had to manually plug in x plus 5 and plug in each answer choice, trying to find out which one actually works. So that's a little bit of Desmos. Definitely look into it a lot more. There's a lot of cool features which I don't know about Desmos because I'm going to be honest, I didn't really use it when I took my test, and I kind of regret that. But if I had used it a lot more, I'm sure that I would have been able to take it a lot more relaxed. All right, next up, formulas. I don't know which ones you guys have been taught. I know I wasn't really taught about like the distance formula and midpoint formula, which is a little bit strange because it seems like everyone else knows them, but I didn't really know like the name of them. We talked about trigonometry earlier for like sine, cosine, tangent, so know those formulas. But also, we also talked about the circle length and area. However, some of the formulas which are not provided, the PSAT provides like a lot of formulas, so like volume of a cylinder and so on. But you're not provided the quadratic formula, distance formula, and midpoint formula. However, all three of these I don't feel are 100% necessary to complete the questions on the PSAT. But it's good to know them. So first off, quadratic formula. It's a quick way to solve more difficult quadratic equations. You guys probably already have this all memorized. You guys have probably been forced to memorize it many, many times, like minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, I'm going to be I'm just looking at this, and I'm realizing that this is a terrible example to give for the quadratic formula, because this is a lot easier if you just factor it out. However, for the quadratic formula, if you have more difficult quadratic equations, like let's say instead of like being like 6x squared minus 17x plus 12, it was like 112 like x squared minus some other big number plus some other big number. It's a lot easier just to plug it into the quadratic formula and then plug that into Desmos to get the answer, right? All right, next up, distance formula. Distance formula is one of those formulas which is not really a necessary formula to memorize. And the reason why I say that, let me erase this, is because it's if you use another formula, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Anyways, it's also able to be found that way, and it looks a lot nicer like that too. So if we have 2 points like a and b, like how they have, a and b, where A is here and B is here, and we want to know like the distance of this line connecting them, we could use the distance formula, but what we could also do is kind of, I'm not going to say derive it because that makes it sound like a little bit more complex, but we could also just create a triangle and use a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, right? So like let's say that B is like, I don't know, at 3 and 2, okay? And then we have A, which is at, I don't know, 6 and 4, right? What we could do here is we could just complete a triangle like so. Just extend this out and bring down the height until they intersect. And what we notice here is that this length here is very easy to find, right? It's just the difference in like the x coordinates for A and B, right? So that gives you like the second x minus first x squared. So what we have here is like 6 and 3. Difference between 6 and 3 is just 3. And then here we have the distance in like the y, 4 and 2. The distance there is just 2. And then from here, we could just use a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared to find this here. So that's an alternative if you don't want to memorize that formula, like I don't have it memorized. But it's really easy either way that you look at it. But just make sure that you know how to find the distance between 2 points. Next up, midpoint formula. Very similar, except that it uses more of a triangle way of thinking about it, where you're just getting the x coordinate difference, dividing it by 2. So you're finding the average of the x coordinate and the average of the y coordinate to find the midpoint. Know how to find the midpoint of between 2 points. All right, we got some practice problems, and these are going to be, like how I mentioned, difficult, okay? And I'm going to work it through with you guys. So the PSAT has a lot of easy questions, but it also has like a lot of difficult questions too. Like how I mentioned, there's no middle ground question. So it's either very simple geometry, like what is the area of a circle with a radius of 3, right? There's those really easy questions, and then they throw at you some really nasty questions. So I think that's very important to know that these are nasty questions because I don't want to help you guys with questions that you guys already know how to easily answer, like so. All right, first off, we got this one. This one is a compound interest type of question. And here we got a ball that is dropped from 22 feet and it bounces repeatedly on the ground. And this function h is talking about the maximum height it reaches after every single time the ball bounces is going to be 85% of the maximum height reached after the previous time. And it's basically asking us what equation will model the estimated maximum height if it's going to be bouncing n times, and n is a whole number between 1 and 10. Right? So there are 2 ways of doing this question. The first one is going to be common sense it out, like how we did earlier. So we know that n is going to be the number of times that it bounces. So like, for example, if we plug in, let's say it bounces once. So if we plug in 1 into n for each one, we see like 22 times 0.22. That is a huge reduction compared to like so we're told that's going to be decreasing by 15%. It'll be 85% of its maximum height. So if every single time it bounces where n is equal to 1, why would it be decreasing by 0.78, right? By 67%, right? So that decrease for A is just way too much, right? The decrease for B, well, B is the correct answer. So anyways, so going to C. So C, after it bounces once, right, it's still 85 times 0.22, right, which does not make sense after you plug that in and solve it out. And then the same thing for D. D is just, it bounces way too high. How do you drop a ball and it bounces higher than you dropped it? So that leaves us with B here. And then another way of thinking about this question is thinking about how it started at that initial height. So principal is going to be 22, and it'll be multiplied by that interest rate. In this case, the interest rate is going to be 0.85 because we're told that the ball, each time that it bounces, will bounce back 85% to its maximum height. Now, I think an error if you rely purely on that formula and don't understand it too well is that you might think, oh, of course it's just be 1 plus 0.85, right? Because the interest rate always starts from 1. Well, there's two ways of debunking yourself there. One, it would be bouncing a lot higher than when you previously dropped it. And also, another way of thinking about it is that, well, it's bouncing to 85% of its maximum height, right? So 85% is not greater than 1. All right, and that'll be raised by n, the number of times that you dropped it. So in our previous example, we used time. Here we use number of times that you dropped it. All right, here is one last question, which I found, which is difficult. And here it is. So this one is going to be a factor question. This is a part 2 question. It is one of the harder ones that you would find. However, this one's a lot more, I guess, solvable than the example I gave you of like the part 2 question. So I'll solve this out on the board real quickly. But basically, here all we're just going to be doing is we're going to be factoring out the expression, the equation on top, and then a sum of a solution is where both sides are equal. So what we want is we want to find what values of x will make both sides equal to 0. Okay. So first step is to factor out this equation up top, which is going to be 64x squared minus 16a plus 4b times x plus a times b. I think that a tricky thing here is to make sure that you have like the right signs. So don't mix up like a positive and negative. So one way to solve that issue from potentially occurring is to actually factor in that negative sign, right? So we have 64x squared minus 16a. And we also see that we have that x in that we're also going to factor in. So we're going to have minus 16ax minus 4bx. So definitely make sure that you get that minus sign in front of that b. And that'll be plus ab. And this is going to be equal to 0. All right. So we want to factor this out. And I guess a cool tip in factoring is definitely trying to have your two initial factors inside of that, I guess, when you're factoring it, to be similar. I don't know why. Maybe this is just me being crazy. But it seems that every single time that I've gotten a factor question, the factors are always very, very close to each other. So in this case, the first thing that would go to my mind would be 8x here and then 8x here, right? Because they're close together, and that would form that 64x squared. Again, I might just be saying like some garbage right now, but I swear, it's always a closer first factor that tends to be the right correct factor. But in this case, it's not. And the reason why we know that is because we have that negative 16ax and that negative 4bx, right? So what we need to use are the factors 16 and 4, because otherwise we're not able to get those middle values of negative 16ax and negative 4bx, right? So it doesn't matter which order we put them in. However, I'm just going to put 16x on this left side here, and then we can put 4x on the other side. All right. Now, does 16x and 4x multiply together to create that 64x squared? Yes, it does. All right, that is great. Now, if we look at the last term, we see a and b, which means that this term here needs to be either a or b, and this term here needs to be the other term, right? We also see that the sign of this last term here is a positive sign. So that means that the middle signs have to either be both positive or both negative, right? Now, the giveaway here on what the sign is in the middle is that these two signs of this negative 16ax and this negative 4bx are both negative, which means that they both have to be negative, these signs here. And why is that? Well, the reason why is going to be you're going to have to multiply this 4x here by this negative and then this number here, all right? Same thing with this, right? You're going to have to multiply this negative and whatever is in here times that 16x. So there's only one way to get that negative sign, and that one way is by having the negative sign be the sign inside of the factors, all right? Now what's next? So we have to have a and b. So this is going to be either a and b, and this would be either a and b. And the way that we determine that is by keeping note of how the factor will expand out. So we have like this negative sign here, and we have this 16x here. So this 16x times whatever is here needs to be equal to one of these two terms here, right? And there's no way that we're going to be able to get that 16ax here from this and this multiplied together. The reason being is that we can't have 4 be a factor on the left parentheses, right? So on the right, that means that we have to have a as our term here, and then we have to have b as our term here. All right, so after we get here, we need to make sure that we get the correct factors. So 16x squared, 16x times 4x will give us our 64x squared, and then our negative a times 16x will give us our negative 16ax. After that, we have our negative b times our 4x, which will give us our negative 4bx. And finally, we have negative b times negative a, which will give us our positive ab. All right, so this will all be equal to 0. So we successfully factored it out. Now, I'm really sorry if I went through like that really quickly. However, it's definitely good to get that quicker practice in for the PSAT, as it is still time tight, no matter how you look at it. So even though it seemed like I did that pretty quickly, it would be better to do it even faster than that. All right, so now we want to get the sum of the solutions to the given equation is equal to k times 4a plus b, where k is a constant. And we want to find that value of k. All right, so yeah, so what is a solution for this equation? Well, a solution for this equation is where they're equal together. So that means that everything on the left side is equal to 0, right? So that's going to be a solution. And we know that anything times 0 is going to be equal to 0. So what our goal is to have this first parentheses be equal to 0, and also we want to have a solution where the second parentheses is equal to 0, right? So when we're doing solutions, what we're doing is we want to isolate this x value, right? So we want this first parentheses to be equal to 0. So that would be 16x minus b. We want this to be equal to 0 for our first solution, right? So to find the solution, what we're going to do, we're going to add b to both sides. So that'll give us 16x is going to be equal to b. And then after that, we can divide 16 to both sides, which will give us our first solution, which is x is equal to b divided by 16. So that's going to be our first solution. Our second solution will be when this 4x minus a is equal to 0. So for that, 4x minus a is equal to 0. Add a to both sides, and then divide by 4 from both sides. So I'll go with x is equal to a divided by 4. All right, so now we have our two solutions, which is b divided by 16 and also a divided by 4. And we're told that the sum of these solutions is equal to k times 4a plus b. All right, let me erase this useless stuff up here now. All right, so we know that b divided by 16 plus a divided by 4, that this will be equal to k times 4a plus b. All right, and k is a constant, and we want to find the value of k. So that means that we want to isolate k on one side, so we can get like a k is equal to something. So for this, we're going to isolate k. So to do that, we're going to divide 4a plus b to both sides. So we have this here, which is b divided by 16 plus a divided by 4. All this would be divided by 1 divided by 4a plus b. All right, and that would be equal to k. Okay, so this looks like it makes absolutely 0 sense. And to make this even worse, this question here is a fill-in, which means that we have to manually type in the value of k. So we can't just plug in numbers and guess at this point. So now we have these written. Now we have our solutions written. I can actually get more space on the whiteboard by erasing this. So let me do that. All right. So now we want to combine these two fractions together. We want to add these fractions together. So common denominator, 16, like so. And we see that it's b divided by 16, so we don't need to do anything to b. That'll just be b plus. Now we have a divided by 4. Now one way to think of how we're doing this, right? We want that common denominator to be equal to 16. So we have a divided by 4, and we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 4. So 4 divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 is just equal to 1, so we're making no technical change there. However, that will give us our 4a divided by 16, which gives us our common denominator of 16, right? So it'll be b plus 4a, and that'll be multiplied by 1 divided by 4a plus b, and that'll be equal to k, right? Now, what we notice here is that our numerator, we have b plus 4a, and we also notice in our denominator, we have our b plus 4a, except it's in a different order, so it might look a little bit stupid. So there we go. We could cancel this, cancel that, and that'll give us our answer of k is equal to 1 divided by 16. I think that something that's really nice to note is that these are like some of the hardest questions that you guys will be seeing on the PSAT. You guys don't need to get these questions right. However, it's good if you guys get them right, because remember that the cutoffs for like the PSAT commended semifinalists and finalists, you can miss a lot of questions and still get that, right? I think another really cool thing to note is that the PSAT is really reading and writing focused, where that score that you get on the reading and writing is multiplied by 2. So in that aspect, if you really want to boost your score and you are struggling on the reading and writing, focus on the reading and writing, because that is where it's really easy to boost your score. So hopefully from our session on Friday compared to our session today, you can notice that there's a lot more tips, there's a lot more strategies that you can put in on the reading and writing to really boost up your score that way. However, once you feel like you've already maxed out your reading and writing score, I think it's also really important to focus on the math section too, because really on the math section, everyone has the same difficulty on the math section, right? So everyone will also struggle to get those points needed for like the commended, semifinalist, and finalist. So definitely getting those points is really important. So again, these 2 practice problems along with that part 2 question are like the nastiest problems that you guys will see on the PSAT. Again, even if you miss all 3 of those questions like that, it doesn't matter. You can still get commended, semifinalists, and finalists very comfortably because there's a good level layer space. So closing off, how to study. Again, practice problems, except in this example, I'm also giving out Blue Book. So Blue Book is an application by the College Board, which actually gives you College Board practice tests, which is really nice, right? These are tests that are actually written by the College Board, which will be really close to the SAT and PSAT. They actually have specific sections for those tests. Also, there's Khan Academy. Khan Academy has a dedicated practice area for the practice problems. And when you do these, of course, high intensity. I know it's hard, and the reason why it's hard is because it's long. So if you can make it a little bit shorter by only doing maybe like 1/4 of the test, do it in sections. So like do section 1 of like the reading and writing, and then do like section 2 maybe like a different day or later that afternoon or something like that. Also, if you guys can, do it in the morning. I didn't really do this. However, it's really important to try to keep when you take these tests somewhat similar to when you're actually taking these tests. So try to do it, before lunch, hopefully, maybe. And then finally, get familiar with that Desmos calculator. It will be one of your best friends for the actual test since it's always there for you. And it's a really cool tool that people used to not have, and definitely take advantage of it. And finally, review all your mistakes and your uncertain answers, right? So if you guess, which is good practice, and you get it right, still review it because you want to understand why you didn't get it right or you had to guess for that. So, yep, that's all. Thank you so much. I know it's tough. I know it's really tough for the math section, especially part 2. But yeah, that's all I have.
Now let's move on to the English section of the PSAT. Now, unfortunately, my audio corrupted, so I'll be doing a voiceover.
Alright, so the format of the reading and writing section is going to be out of 1520 points, with 760 points dedicated to reading and writing. The digital test for people that go to my high school will be on October 22. Now, the reading and writing section is a total of 1 hour and 4 minutes, so 32 minutes each section. There will be a total of 54 multiple choice questions, divided evenly between 2 sections, so 27 questions each, without a break in between. Now, one thing I forgot to really mention when I presented this boot camp in person instead of over voiceover, it sucks that I lost audio, but I didn't really mention that much about the break that you get in between the reading and writing part and the math part. So after you complete the 2 sections of the reading and writing of the PSAT, you have a 10-minute break. So bring a snack, bring some water, leave it outside the test room, drink the water, eat the snack, and definitely move around. During this time, at least what helped me was not really trying to, talk with people, trying not to lose my focus, right? Because you still have like a decent bit more to go. You still have about like 1 hour left to take testing on. Alright, so both the sections of the reading and writing will have the same question types. Section 2 does tend to be a little bit more difficult, but it's not too noticeable. It is an adaptive test after all. Alright, so some common questions that you'll be running into will be fill-in-the-blank questions. So basically these you just have to read as little as you can while getting all the context, right? Because the reading and writing section of the PSAT is very time tight. It is a lot more time tight than the math section. You'll find yourself running out of time if you read the entire paragraph every single time. So it's all about saving time whenever you can. So in this case, we got Sam Gilliam from the southern US, and he became the first artist to drape painted canvases into flowing shapes. Now, I think that with these like paragraph size text, the most important thing, especially for fill in the blank, is to avoid reading the entire thing. Although it might take you like maybe 30 seconds to to read additional useless detail, there's still like 30 questions per section of the reading and writing, right? So trying to save time. So in this case, for most of the fill in the blank questions, what I do is I go straight to the sentence missing the blank. So in this case, he later explored a different style, blank quilt-like paintings inspired by the patchwork quilting tradition. All right, after this, I tend to just really plug and chug, just trying out the answer choices. So going straight to answer choices, he later explored a different style, predicting quilt-like paintings, 0 cents, don't choose A. B, refusing. He later explored a different style, refusing quilt-like paintings inspired. Doesn't really make sense. C, hiding. He later explored a different style, hiding quilt-like paintings inspired. But then there's D. He later explored a different style, creating quilt-like paintings inspired. So D is the answer choice that makes the most sense. Now, sometimes reading just the one sentence missing the blank does not give you enough context to understand the question and to choose an effective answer choice. So after you plug in the answers, after you get really confused, read the whole text and use some context clues, but when you don't have to, avoid reading additional information. Another thing that is also very important to note for all the standardized tests, PSAT, SAT, ACT, it's the test creators, the College Board, the test creators are, the worst that could really happen for them is that they create tests where the answer key is wrong, right? So they always make sure that there's always one very solid correct answer, right? There's one answer that is drastically better than the rest. So sometimes you might run into questions which are like, crap, A and B both make sense, right? But if one is just slightly, it makes more sense than the other one, it's usually going to just be that answer choice if it's between those two answers. All right, next up, main purpose. So again, it's all about saving time in the reading and writing section. It's time tight, so read the full text very quickly. This means skim it. So in this case, if I'm reading through this, I just move my eyes really quickly through it and read as fast as I can before looking at the rough answers. So here we have Julius. He moved. He knows stuff about the neighborhood. No, not Julius moved. We moved to Julius. And he knew a lot of stuff. He knew roads, water courses, he knew soil, he knew produce, he knew hunting, fishing. Basically, he knew a lot of things. He was very, I guess, helpful. I don't know. He knows stuff. And then after looking at the answers, I try to create a rough guess. Now, the reason why creating a rough guess is useful is that usually for these main purpose questions, the answer choices are a little bit longer. So to save that additional time, make a guess before going through the answer choices. So in this case, if I had to make a guess, I would be like, crap, this guy Julius, he really knows his stuff. You know, he's a smart guy and he's helpful. You know, he knows stuff, he's helpful. And then after that, look at the answer choices, find the one that really matches that. And in this case, it's D, to explain different ways in which Julius was helpful. Now, this question is also a great example of how there's always going to be one definitive correct answer for the ACT. So you could see how, I guess, answers B and C could kind of make sense, but then D is just a drastically better answer because, again, it's the main purpose. All right, next up, function of text. So these are usually trickier questions. That is mainly because the test creators want to trick you, right? They don't want it easy, right? They don't want you to save time by only reading the important details, but it's also very important to save time by reading the important details. In this case, we got a question like, how lifelike are they? What does that tell us? Literally nothing. So we're trying to find out the function of that text. So to figure this out, one, which is what I would not recommend doing, is to read the entire thing. You know, that it's very time consuming. It's not effective usually because if your memory is as bad as mine, I'm joking, my memory's not terrible, but if you don't have a great memory, then you might forget important details. So what I like doing first before trying option 1 is option 2, reading the surrounding sentences. So in this case, we got, how lifelike are they? Many computer animators prioritize this question as they strive to create ever more realistic environments and lighting. Okay, so again, these are trickier questions, so definitely spend a little bit of time, if you have that extra time, to think about it a little bit. So how lifelike are they? Computer animators, they're prioritizing this question, and they're trying to create more realistic environments and lighting. After this, usually you can try to make a guess about the answer. However, usually it's a little bit more time effective just to go straight to answers for these types of questions. So in this case, we got option A, reflects a primary goal that computer animators have. I mean, this is the correct answer, and it's a really good answer. So right after reading A, you might just want to pick it, right? But there might be a better answer because again, some of these standardized tests, right, they have 2 or 3 answers that all could be correct, and maybe one of them was just better than others. But A is a really solid answer. That is the actual answer. Now B represents a concern. There's nothing really that the computer animators are concerned about in creating these backgrounds and lighting effects. So especially when they're talking about in creating unique backgrounds than realistic ones, this just doesn't make sense. And then C and D kind of follow that same train of thought as B. All right, next up, tables. I think that of all the tips which I tell people when I tutor for like my tutoring business, Charlie.works, is this tip here. So the test which this tip actually benefits from the most is by far the ACT science section. So I know that they might be getting rid of the ACT science. I think they're making it optional. But the ACT science section, if you understand how to do this tip, you will 1, save so much time, and 2, score so much higher. All right. So whenever you see a table on the PSAT, SAT, ACT, the number one thing that you have to do is to use the actual table, right? So to be able to use the table, you need to understand the question. So go straight to the question. The questions for these are usually in the text. So in this case, the highest number of tools made from clamshells that were collected from the beach was found at a depth of what? All right, so now after this, we go straight to the table looking for an answer. All right, number of tools, well, they're made out of clamshells. So we got the beach, right? We got the beach, and we're trying to look for the greatest number of clamshells at that beach. So we see that number 99 from the depth of 3 to 4 meters. So the highest number of tools made from clamshells were collected at a depth of 3 to 4 meters for the beach, right? So that's the answer right there. Click C, move on. For the ACT, it's very similar to that. Read the question, go straight to the table, then go straight back to the answers, select one, move on. The ACT science has a lot of superfluous text that does not need to be read. I've been tutoring the ACT, SAT, PSAT tutoring classes for a long time. And I think in all that time, the only time I had to go back to like the text for like an ACT science question was like one time. And it was just to confirm that the test that they were running was providing water to a hamster. So I didn't really even need to go back to it because everyone needs to drink water. All right, moving on. We got note questions. So these ones, call me crazy, but I actually have a fun time doing these. In fact, I have like a fun time doing a lot of PSAT questions. I don't know. I think like the timing of them is very, very interactive. There you go. Okay, so for these note questions, I would read the question first. Right? So in this case, the student wants to emphasize the similarity in how critics responded to Truer's book. After that, read the notes real quickly. So it's talking about the book in the first note. Doesn't say anything about critics. We don't need to include that in our answer. Second note, in a review, a critic noted. We want to include that in our answer. So 2 is important. 3 and 4 are also important since we see the word critics are talking about this book. I think my microphone might be a little bit too loud. Let me lower that a little bit. All right, test. All right, there we go. Okay, and then after that, we now know that notes 2, 3, and 4 are important. So we need to include these in our answer choice, and that would be going straight to the answers, trying to find one that matches these 3 notes. So A matches none of them, so that cannot be the answer. B mentions them, but it's only mentioning 1, right? So this is a case where there's a better answer. So B is not correct because it's only talking about 1 critic. Now, C talks about the critics. Like, it's talking about the critics with an S. There's a lot of critics talking about the book, and it answers that question in how the critics are similarly responding to Truer's book. And then finally, D is not talking about the similarity in how the critics respond. It's talking about a disagreement that they have. Well, not a disagreement on what they have, but more like the focus of their writing. All right, next up, we got grammar rules. We're going to be talking a lot about these in a bit, but the best way to deal with these grammar rules is practice, practice, practice. These grammar rules is something that you learn through practice, and you need to practice them by first knowing what the grammar rules are. So to know what the grammar rules are, I know you guys are gonna hate me. If you guys don't know red ink, you guys know why literally no one at a high school likes no red ink, right? It has like, if you make one wrong answer, you have to answer like a billion questions to get back on track. Anyways, but no red ink has a lot of ACT topics, right? If you just search for additional lessons on topics that you see on the ACT, it goes really in depth, and it's a lot of great practice questions there that could be applied to the ACT, SAT, PSAT. It's great. Next up, for verb tense, which we'll also be talking about in a little bit, look at the date. Like if it's in like the past, for example, in this question, 1903, we could get an idea of what the verb tense will be, and also the surrounding forms of words. So if the blank is next to like something that's past tense, you're gonna guess it's in past tense, right? The blank will have to be past tense. And then finally, reading it out loud in your head. Believe it or not, maybe this is just me, but I think a lot of people are able to do this, is since we're so used to reading things in like our head, when we read books, we read it in our head most of the time. So we get like the idea of what good grammar sounds like, right? So if you read the text yourself in your head after you put in like a blank, you could usually tell if it's correct or not. In this case, we see it's 1903 for this question, so it's gonna be in the past. And then going to the blank, upon returning from the 3-day excursion, Roosevelt blank to conserve the nation's wilderness areas. Okay, so all the answer choices are about vowing. So Roosevelt will be like, you know, vowing to conserve the nation's wilderness area. And again, this is in the past, so I'm just saying vowing as in like it's gonna be about vow, right? It's gonna be about the word vow, not like the answer is not A, all right, because that is not the correct tense. All right, so we see that we could, first off, it's in the past, so that is a big hint. But we could also see a word upheld in the same sentence, which is in the past tense. So therefore, is vowing, it's not past tense. Will vow is in the future. Roosevelt is unfortunately dead, RIP. And then vows, Roosevelt again is unfortunately not with us anymore, RIP. So therefore, that leaves us with B, the correct answer, which is past tense. All right, that was a lot. I actually covered this a lot faster when I'm voice-overing the presentation instead of actually doing it in person. But hopefully you guys are making sense of what I'm saying. And if you guys have any questions, leave in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. All right, next up, general tips. General tips, these are pretty similar to the ones we talked about in the math section. Don't leave answers blank. Eliminate the wrong answers. Skip hard questions. Think of the test in sections. Warm up your mind before the test. Read something before the test. Don't pull an all-nighter. And then I think that the tip that I didn't really talk about for the math section, but it's also very important, is to enjoy the passages, right? You're going to be reading these texts, especially for the ACT, where it's just a bunch of just text for the reading section. But you're going to be reading a lot for the PSAT, SAT, and ACT. Just try your best to enjoy it. I feel like it keeps you engaged. It kept me engaged, at least when I was taking these standardized tests. So definitely try to enjoy the passages. They're sometimes really interesting. So definitely give that a shot. All right, next up, some more specific tips for the reading and writing section. We're going to be going over non-essential parts. So this is actually a topic that is covered a lot in No Red Ink. And basically the idea of this is that if you have text which relates to a sentence, however, it doesn't really need to be there, right? It's just adding some non-essential details, but are useful enough to actually be in the text, to the text. right? So in this case, if we look at the question on the right, question 13, on the right, we see on one hand, I couldn't wait to view painter George Seurat's 10-foot wide a Sunday afternoon. So since the text in between the two commas, if it's not in like a list, is considered non-essential, let's try to read it without the text, without the non-essential text. So in this case, I couldn't wait to view painter 10-foot wide a Sunday afternoon makes zero sense whatsoever. So we know for a fact that George Seurat is not non-essential. So good for him. So that therefore is not the answer. So it can't be A. On the question to the left, we see, but Jason Box, an associate professor of geology at Ohio State, right? So we could try reading it without the an associate professor of geology at Ohio State. So, but Jason Box believes that another factor added to the early thaw. That makes sense, right? So an associate professor of geology at Ohio State can be non-essential. All right, there you go. Moving on, we got verb tense. I'm not going to go too in depth with these because we've been practicing these since we were basically born, trying to use the correct verb tense for what we say. I think that the only ones to maybe review before you take your test are like the perfect continuous and the perfect verb tenses, because sometimes we incorrectly use those. So for example, like had been dancing, have been dancing, will have been dancing. Know the difference. All right, next up, whom versus who, right? So this one here pops up quite a bit. This does pop up a lot more than you would expect on these standardized tests. And from what I found, the best way of doing these is actually pretty interesting. So I've researched like how to teach whom versus who a lot, because it's a question a lot of people have, right? And really the only thing I got back from like how to explain it is really to try substituting him and her for whom, or substituting he or she for who, right? And if it makes sense with that, then that is the correct who or whom, right? So in this case, we got Squanto, a Potrex tribe member from whom they learned about planting crops and surviving in the New World, right? So we have whom. Sometimes we're going to be substituting him or her. Let's just substitute him, right? So a Potrex tribe member, him, they learned about planting crops. Makes zero sense. But then also who makes zero sense, because a Potrex tribe member from he, they learned about planting crops and surviving in the New World. So the tricky part of these questions is the reordering, right? Because you sometimes need to reorder the sentence a little bit using the substitution to make it make sense. So in this case, from him, they learned about planting crops and surviving the New World makes sense, instead of him from they learned, right? So yeah, so definitely try just substituting it straight out, but then after that, if that makes zero sense whatsoever and you know it's going to be either whom or who, then try reorganizing the sentence to make it make sense. So in this case, it is going to be A, from whom, from him, they learned about planting crops. All right, next up, this one here, it's going to seem very specific and you're going to think, wow, this question here, no, not this question here, but this tip here is useless. But I'm telling you, this tip here is like a free 2 or 3 points without even trying if you understand it. So if you practice it and understand it. First off, I need to clarify that this tip does not work for the ACT. I know that a lot of tips that we have discussed for like the math and reading and writing section work with the ACT, SAT, and the PSAT. But this one works for only the SAT and PSAT. And this is of 2024 fall. And why is this? Well, that is because the PSAT and SAT do not actually consider but do not have questions about the difference between a semicolon and a period. So another exception for this tip here is that it also does not work in lists, so do not consider a comma and a period in list. But other than those 2 exceptions, treat the comma and semicolons as periods, because semicolons and periods are not tested for the difference between them. All right, so for example here, we got this question, living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic. We got a semicolon, so treat that as a period. All right, so what we have just shown there is living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic. That is not a complete sentence, right? There is no subject, right? So we know that a semicolon can't be right, and we also know that a comma and can't be right because those are both treated as periods. And if that is a period, then that living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic is not a complete sentence. So we immediately could cross off A, and we could immediately cross off C, right? So that just leaves us off with B and D. Living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic. Then after that, we got a colon. The Harvey girls became known as a transformative force. That doesn't make sense. The second part of the sentence doesn't really connect with the part before the semicolon in a sort of continuation way that a colon provides, right? While D, a comma, living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic, the Harvey girls became known as the transformative force in the American West. So that will be D. So this tip seems very specific, but we're going to talk about it a little bit later when we get to practice problems. All right, next up, practice problems. I just made it seem like that we're going to be getting to practice problems in like a little bit, but like we actually just switched straight to practice problems. All right, first question here. Oh no, it shows the answer. Crap. At least on my side, it shows the answer because I am voice-overing this and just clicking through the slideshow right now. Okay, but anyways, let me just delete that. All right. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. So this question here is a note question. What does that mean? We go straight to the question, right? The student wants to emphasize the different orders in which Australia's invertebrate species are, and invertebrate animals are classified. Okay, great. So after that, we go straight to the notes. So which one of these emphasizes the different orders that the invertebrates are classified in? First off, note 1 doesn't talk about different orders, so that can't be included in our final response. Note B, very good. We see invertebrates of the order, not even going to try to pronounce that, but which contains the sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants, and so on. And that leads us to 3, note 3. Also talks about invertebrates of a specific order. Great, we want to include that. And note 4 does not talk about the different orders, so we do not need to include note 4. So we want to find an answer choice which talks about options B and C. Right? So in our case, that will be, well, the answer is going to be, let's take a look. A, it's not talking about the different orders. It's only talking about one order, Coleoperta. Now you know why I don't even try to pronounce some of these things. But A is not correct because of that. B, it's talking about the invertebrates. Some belong to one order and some belong to the other order. That's talking about the different orders in which the invertebrate species are classified. Invertebrate animals are classified. So B is going to be the correct answer. Now, one question I got when I was presenting is, if you know that the answer choice is going to be like either B or C, for example, would you even bother looking at answer D? Well, if you know 100% sure, yeah, sure, it's going to be between B and C for 100%. Yeah, they don't need to look at D. But I would say that I have never really known an answer, especially for the reading and writing section, that is 100% like, oh my god, this has to be the answer. There's no better answer, right? So what I always do is I usually just go through all the answer choices, right? Unless I make a guess and then choose an answer, because then I have that sort of checking of myself. All right, so B is going to be it. C, let's talk about one order. It's not talking about the other order. It's not talking about the different orders. So C is not correct. And then D does not talk about the different orders and how they're classified. So D is not correct either. Next up, we got this question here talking about Lucy Maud Montgomery. All right. And it's talking about their novel. All right, so this is a main purpose question. So what does that mean? We skim, right? We skim through this text fast. So we got Anne, she likes color, talking to Marilla, holding branches from the nature. She's happy that there's October. Doesn't like other months. Well, no. She does not like skipping the other months. She's happy about nature, decorating their room. Now, Marilla is a hater, right? She doesn't respect Anne, unfortunately, and says that the nature's messy, who's not aesthetic. Imagine not being aesthetic. And then clutters up, then nature clutters up Anne's room. So, yeah, Marilla and Anne have very differing opinions about nature. So what is the main purpose of the text? Well, the entire text is talking about the difference in their idea of nature, right? So that is going to be our guess. We're going to look at the answer choices now. A, Anne has a newly developed appreciation of nature. I mean, we have nothing that's indicating to us that it's a new appreciation. So A is not correct. B, describe an argument they often have. I mean, it's an argument, but how do we know that it's one that they often have? Well, we don't, so B is not correct. And then C is good, right? This is kind of like an example of, wow, there are multiple answers that could work. C is not a bad answer whatsoever. Talking about how she's she's disapproving of how Anne's decorating her room. That is something that pops up in the text. However, that's not really the main purpose, right? That is a total of one sentence, right? So C could probably not be it, but it could also be it, right? So that leaves us with D, to show how Anne and Marilla have very different personalities. So D is just a much better answer than C, and why is that? Well, the entire paragraph is going on and on and on about how Anne loves nature while Marilla does not. So I would consider that different personalities. So D is the correct answer. Next up, we got 15. Which choice completes the text? So this will be a fill in the blank question. So we go straight to the sentence missing the blank. More advanced floats can measure a wider range of blank and monitor seasonal ice zones. Okay, so after this we just plug and chug. So first off, we got A. Okay, more advanced floats can measure a wider range of variables. Okay, colon, travel to greater depths and monitor seasonal ice zones. Okay, well, I don't see how traveling to greater depths and monitoring seasonal ice zones have anything to do with measuring a wider range of variables. So having a colon as the separator just does not make sense. Next up, we got B. More advanced floats can measure a wider range of variables, travel to greater depths, and monitor seasonal ice zones. I like that. It's a list of different things that the advanced floats could do. So B is the correct answer. One thing that you might be wondering is that I think there's an Oxford English way of lists, which is if the list is over 3 items, right? If it's equal or over to 3 items, then use a comma before the and, right? So in this case, having a comma before an and is apparently the better answer. However, you're gonna never be tested on having a comma before the last and, between the second to last and the last items of a list. So don't worry about that, but that will not ever pop up on the PSAT I know for a fact and SAT I know for a fact. All right, C. C just does not make sense. Measure a wider range of variables, travel to greater depths. That is not one item in a list, right? So next up, we got D. We got a semicolon. We treat the semicolon as a period. And again, this just does not make sense because more advanced floats could measure a wider range of variables, travel to greater depths, period. And then we start a sentence with an and, monitor seasonal ice zones. That's not a complete sentence. D can't be right, so B is the correct answer. All right, next up, we got 18. Haiku-like poems of Thomas, whatever that is. Okay. So this is another fill in the blank question. Great. So we go straight to the sentence missing the blank. So we got which present nature and dream influenced images and crisp spare language have earned the Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary blank. Okay. That is strange, right? We have a them, right? So that means that we're going to need to have probably a transition or a linking idea in our answer choice, right? So let's take a look. First off, we know that a period and a semicolon are treated the same for the PSAT. And we are taking the PSAT right now, right? So therefore, there's only going to be one correct answer. So that means that there can't be 2 correct answers. So that means that A and C, we can just knock them off, right? So A and C can't be the correct answers. So that leaves us with B and D. All right, let's see. Whew. The poems present images in language which have earned this poet praise from leading contemporary writers. Among them, Nigerian American essayist and novelist. Okay, so I think that the one that you might notice is that if we don't have any punctuation whatsoever, this is a very long sentence, right? And the two ideas aren't very linked together, and instead they're linked together by the word among. So among these leading contemporary poets, right, is this one essayist and a novelist, right? So this is going to be a continuation of that idea, which will give us D, because if there is no punctuation, it is a run-on sentence. Next up, we got this one. I think that we're close to the end. Yeah, this is gonna be the last question, the last practice question. So it's a no question. So that means that we go straight to the question. The student wants to emphasize the difference between C-type and S-type asteroids. After that, we go straight to the notes, right? So the notes are as follows. Planetary scientists classify asteroids based on their composition. Does not talk about the question whatsoever. Does not emphasize the difference. So note 1 can be safely ignored. Note 2, it's talking about a characteristic of C-type asteroids. So that is good, right? We want to emphasize a difference. So if S-type and C-type asteroids are made out of different things, that is a difference that we could emphasize. So note 2 is useful. Note 3, very useful too. These C-type asteroids account for 75% of the known asteroids. Account that. And then same thing with 4 and 5. They're both very useful information. So notes 2 through 5, we want to use in our answer. All right, so we got answer choice A. They classify asteroids into C and S types. There is no we're not really emphasizing a difference between them. We're just saying that there's two different ways to classify these asteroids. Well, two of these ways to classify asteroids are C and S types. So A, no good, would not use that. Next up, B. We got planetary scientists consider an asteroid's composition, like if it's made out of so-and-so when classifying it. I mean, it's a difference, but it's not emphasizing anything about a C-type or S-type asteroid, right? They don't even use the words C-type and S-type. So B, not a good answer. C. This is actually a pretty good answer choice, right? This is kind of a potential answer. Like it's saying that some asteroids are S-type, some others are C-type. It's emphasizing the difference in that way. However, another percentage is classified as C-type asteroids. It's kind of like a weak. It's not really emphasizing that difference, right? It's more like saying, yeah, some asteroids are this and some asteroids are this other percent, right? But it doesn't emphasize that difference, so C probably is not it. And that leaves us with D. So this one is really emphasizing that difference. Yeah, C-type asteroids made out of carbon. S-type asteroids are made out of silicate minerals. So there we go. So there you go. So how to study, just like for the math, for the reading and just like for the math PSAT. Do practice problems. They're all over Khan Academy. Additionally, Blue Book. I didn't really mention it for the reading and writing section when I presented it, but Blue Book also has reading and writing questions that are very, very good. High intensity, half sessions. I would not do 2 sessions of the reading and writing in one go. I would take one, then take a break, but definitely try to do one full PSAT test before your actual test. It really shows you your timing as you fatigue and get tired, as you read a lot, do a lot of math questions. So try to do one full test before you actually take the test. Do it in the early morning, you're going to be taking the test early morning, probably on like a weekend. So don't pull an all-nighter. And finally, review all your mistakes, which is pretty obvious, but also review those answers that you guessed on but just guessed right. Okay, so guessing is great. You should be guessing if you don't know the answer on the PSAT, SAT, and ACT. But you also want to understand why you had to guess. So definitely take a look at those uncertain answers. And thank you very much. So that is the end of these 2 boot camps that I presented at my high school.
Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this video was useful, and please consider donating to my children's home and designating your gift towards Turpin PSAT.